My guest tonight is John Pagnotta, a jazz and soul saxophonist and classical flautist who has worked as a professional musician for over 30 years. During the last year of his studies at York University, John landed the sax and percussion chair in Liberty Silver's band, a signed artist with a BMG record label who is gearing up for a worldwide tour opening for Billy Ocean. Despite the band's local appeal, the promise of a worldwide tour never did come to fruition, and John decided to attend Teachers College in Windsor. After 10 years of various teaching positions at various schools, he landed the much-coveted jazz studies position at Earl Higgs Secondary School and worked with some of the city's finest young, aspiring jazz artists. After more than 25 years of teaching, John decided to retire early and spend more of his time and energy with his young family and music. He is currently pursuing his Master's of Music Composition degree, and his CD, New Standards, is the end product of a self-directed course in jazz studies. And now John Pagnotta joins me live in the studio today. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So, John, you grew up as the son of struggling Italian immigrants,
Yeah.
and they stressed a practical education. When did you first realize that music was a viable career trajectory?
I don't know if I ever did, to tell you the truth. It was something that I was very interested in. I can actually remember, I don't know if you've ever done this, but going through some old things and you find your old report cards. And I remember digging up my kindergarten report cards, and one of the most common, or any of those report cards, and one of the most common comments was that John loves music and goes out of his way to perform music. And actually, I still remember being in kindergarten. They don't do this anymore, but we used to have these huge blocks that they used to play, like really big, like this big, And so I used to always build a stage. And they had these planks, and we would pretend we had guitars, and we always were performing. So for whatever reason, I definitely had the music bug.
And what were some of the first records that you listened to?
We didn't have any records. My parents were Italian immigrants, and they came from severe poverty. And I grew up in my grandfather's house along with my cousins, and they were also renting rooms out. So I don't actually, you know what, maybe we had a record player, but I don't actually remember, buying records until I was in like grade 5 or 6. I remember actually going down to Sam the Record Man downtown and buying, 45s. I can't really remember. A little bit of Soap, actually, I think was my first 45. And just pop music. It was just pop. We were actually really into the radio. And I remember going to Honest Ed's. We were just down the street from Honest Ed's and getting transistor radios, which we used to carry, and that was the thing to do, right? And radio back then, I feel really kind of, I think we were really lucky, our generation, in that pop radio back then was really pretty special. The time between the late 60s, especially, and the early 70s, the stuff on the radio was so dynamic. There was so much creativity. It's very different from today. I'm finally listening to pop radio again, and that's mainly due to the fact that I have young kids. For the longest time, I would kind of refuse, but then my little girl, who's now 7, kept on insisting that we listen to Virgin Radio when we're in the car.
And what do you think now of pop radio?
Well, to tell you the truth, it was a hard go for me to get into it. But, just to make her happy, we would start splitting the time,
Yeah.
And the more you listen to it, then you start to appreciate things. Whereas, I mean, if you just listen to it a little bit, you realize that there really isn't a lot happening, right? There seems to be virtually the same kind of beats going on all the time. Certainly harmonically and melodically, there isn't too much happening. Although I shouldn't say that. Melodically, you find some different things. And certainly they're pulling in different cultures a little bit. In terms of form, you can pretty much guess what's going to happen, So, all that stuff coming from a creative jazz musician, with some training that I've had, right? That stuff just doesn't appeal to you.
What drew you to the pop music when you were a kid?
I think it was just, it was what was out there. I had, I grew up with my uncle who's only a few years older than me, and so he was definitely into whatever was hot. I remember he was very interested in the band Chicago. And man, those early Chicago records, do yourself a favor and just like have a night and just put some of them on because it's fantastic. What those cats were doing, it's not only, the rock sound. Terry Kath, I think his name is, the guitar player. Fantastic, like amazing. But with the brass and everything. But listen to what they do with the form of a pop tune. Like Saturday in the Park was one of their biggest hits. And I remember listening to that on my radio all the time. But that has a whole other section where they go into like Saturday in the Park, and then they do a bridge, slow motion. The whole feel changes, da 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 da, where they do that kind of a swing thing, Like that kind of arranging, that kind of form stuff doesn't happen now. Again, I think it's more about the beat, keeping the dance beat going or keeping a particular kind of mood going now. And I have to say, as I've been listening to current pop music more, thanks to my daughter Sophia, there are some things I really like. And I think there are some really exciting things happening in pop music now too. And I think there always have been. But, coming from, a jazz background where you're expecting, or at least you have a taste for more harmony and more interesting melodic lines, as opposed to just the pentatonic stuff, right?
Yeah, the stuff now on the radio sounds kind of bland.
Yeah, there isn't a lot there, right?
And when did you start discovering jazz records?
I went to a regular high school, Harvard Collegiate Grade School, really good music teacher who would play, once in a while he would play us, great classical music, and also great jazz stuff. And, I remember him playing Buddy DeFranco. He was a tuba player, actually, and I think he played in Dixieland bands. But he also really loved Buddy DeFranco. And so I remember hearing that and, it sounded great, and classic Count Basie albums, that kind of stuff. But again, that was at an arm's length. I certainly played in a jazz band.
You played saxophone?
I played saxophone, yeah. Started out clarinet, but then switched to saxophone. That was typical, right? That's what you did. But I never really had a chance to take private lessons, so I kind of, learning in the school, unless you have a teacher who's going to like really take the extra effort to give you some private one-on-one time or just some individual time, you're kind of pretty much learning on your own. Right. And, as good as our teacher was, and he was very good at, correcting stuff, you're going to develop bad habits. And the saxophone is one of the best instruments to develop bad habits. But just because it's so easy to get a sound. Right?
Right.
I mean, you can, put it together upside down and blow into it and you're going to get a sound, right?
That's right.
As opposed to like a trumpet or a flute or a trombone where it's quite a bit harder to get a sound. But the good thing about that is as you're working to get that sound, you have to do things a particular way, a right way in order to do it. There's so many bad ways of making a sound on a saxophone. And if you just keep doing that, then you develop a bad habit.
So then you said that when you transferred from political science into a music degree, that you had to catch up.
Oh, yeah.
Was it like you had to get rid of all those bad habits? Was that the first step?
I had my first private lesson when I was 19. And I went to Jane Fair, who's a well-respected player and musician in town. And I'll never forget the look on her face, She introduced herself, I introduced myself. I said, okay, why don't you play something for me? And I was holding the horn like this because this is, what I saw or what I thought you had to do, right? And I thought it looked cool, right? And I could remember the look on her face, like she was just in shock. And she was like almost pulling her hair out thinking, what am I going to do? And to tell you the truth, I was surprised that she actually agreed to take me on as a student because she knew, and I probably knew then that, I had to undo all kinds of things, right?
And what was it like catching up to your peers?
Oh, well, once I went into music, once I switched from political science, talk about stressful, because most of my peers, had been, they had piano lessons or violin lessons or whatever since they were like 4 or 5, And I never had that, right? And so, like, even finding my way around the piano was tough. And, again, when I look back, when I think about it, I'm kind of surprised that they actually let me in the school. But as you know, post-secondary education is also a business too, and they want to fill the seats. And, and I certainly had good intentions. Yeah, and I was very eager, and I was a very good student. If you tell me to do something, I'd do it very well. The problem is I didn't get any of that real instruction, right?
Did you pick it up very quickly?
I wouldn't say quickly, because at that stage, I was also looking for shortcuts. And again, it's not the best way to do this, right? Because when you look for shortcuts, inevitably, you're not going to get the whole picture.
What were some of the bands that you played in that you're really proud of? You still look back now and you're like, wow. Liberty Silver?
Yeah, Liberty Silver Band was very cool. And the best thing about Liberty's band is that we were just playing really great gigs. And I really felt like I had made it, like I really felt like I was a pro.
How did that opportunity come about?
I knew the keyboard player who was in the band, Mark Lalama, who's a wonderful, wonderful musician around town. Actually, he lives down around Niagara now, but he still gigs quite a bit. We had gone to school together. I met him at York, and we had worked together in another pop band, a club band called, initially was called Automatic, but then became known as Big Business. And we did all the clubs downtown and, up in Orangeville and Barrie and stuff like that. And we were working. I mean, back in the 80s, there was actually quite a bit of work. And you could actually make a living as a performing musician, It wasn't, like there was work, and so you could work. I mean, we were working split weeks. It wasn't, like when I talked to some of my older friend musicians, they were saying like the 70s was a heyday or the 60s, right? Where apparently, you'd have to be, what they say is that you'd have to be pretty bad not to get
work.
Yeah, not to get steady work, right?
Right.
Back in the 80s, it was split weeks. So you could either do like a Monday to Wednesday or a Thursday to Friday at a club, and the pay wasn't that much different than it is today,
Right.
So yeah.
So you were playing a lot.
It was, that summer that I was busy with Liberty, man, I was playing with Liberty, I was playing with Big Business. I was also involved in another school band, something that came out of York called Still Life, and that was an original band led by Norm Leota, and all original music, and it was a world beat kind of band. So there was a lot of different kind of grooves. We played a lot of 12/8 grooves. We played some reggae sort of things, and really great. And we were playing on Queen Street a lot. Like we did the Horseshoe Tavern. I remember a bunch of shows we did at the Horseshoe. The place was rammed.
That's still around.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It was great. And the Cameron House. We did all those rooms.
Right.
And it was. We did a bunch of shows up at York too, and. Yeah, there was work and it was fun. But going back to Liberty, like I remember playing the Forum. The Forum, you probably don't remember this, but before the amphitheater at Ontario Place, they had a venue called the Forum. And the Forum, the thing that was unique about it, again, they had lawn seating, but it went all the way around, and they had circular seating, and the stage actually rotated. So it was quite cool, very unique.
Was it in the middle?
Yeah, the stage was right in the middle, and the whole thing, it was quite a big stage.
Right.
It was on a turntable, and it would turn as a performance happened, right? So it was very cool. And I remember we opened up for Taylor Dane, who was a huge artist back in the 80s. We opened up there for her. And I can remember still, we get to the gig, and I had all my gear. I was playing tenor and alto and soprano for sure. So I had that and probably a bag. And I remember getting there, and all the kids would come in and rush in, and they'd grab my stuff, and they'd say, "Okay, sir, we're going to take it here." And I thought, all right, man, this is great. I made it.
Big time.
Yeah. And I remember you get on stage, and I had like 3 monitors all to myself,
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was good. And, they really took time getting the sound right. Yeah, we played a couple of really great shows. That certainly was one of them. We played up at the Kingswood Music Theater, right? That was a real venue. Like when when Wonderland first opened, like they had real acts coming in there. We opened for a band called the Jets, and they had, I don't know, a bunch of pop tunes out there. I can't remember.
Right.
But again, the same kind of treatment, and thousands of people, right, listening to you play. So, yeah, I really, that was a real taste of what it could be, and I was really excited. I mean, Billy Ocean was it. Back in the mid '80s, like Caribbean Queen was out of My Dreams into My Car. Like he was it. He was at the top of the charts, and a chance to open for him worldwide. I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to meet all the right people, and
And it's going to happen.
And it's going to happen, and then it just didn't. Yeah.
And we'll hear more about that. Let's take a quick break, and we'll listen to Little Wing from John Pagnotta's new CD, New Standards. I'm Felix Wong here in the studio with John Pagnotta, and you're listening to Double Booked.
New Standards was really my attempt to try to marry popular music with jazz. And, I think the goal, it's kind of silly now when I say it out loud, the goal was to try to expand the jazz audience, thinking that, if people knew that I was playing a Hendrix tune, for instance, or The Weekend, which is another tune that I do on the album, that maybe they'd flock to my gigs.
Did that happen?
No, unfortunately, that didn't happen. I mean, although, there was some interest, and certainly people would comment and say, well, that's really cool what you did with the Weekend tune, the way you changed the groove and everything. But the thing is, I was still playing jazz, right? And jazz is not the easiest music to listen to, especially, unless you have some kind of a jazz background, or you heard it when you were a kid, or you were instructed in it. It's challenging. Jazz demands a lot from its listener, right? In a way that pop music today doesn't, right? And I think a lot of things in our society today don't demand that much from us.
Right.
And that's why art is what it is, and certainly pop music is what it is, right? So my idea just, didn't quite work, right? I think
You can try again now with this tune.
Well, I think actually what another way to marry the two genres would be to go the other way. So to take like classic jazz tunes or standards, and then play them with the grooves and with maybe watered down harmony that you would hear in pop tune. Like one of the things I like to do on cocktail gigs is like, let's say you take a tune like what's a good one? Like, let's say you take Skylark, right? Skylark, have you anything to say to me? But you put a kind of a hip hop groove to it, like. Would be so again, I think that kind of a sonic presentation of a beat and a groove would be much more appealing to the general audience, as opposed to swing and what we did or what they did in the 50s.
Right.
And so my album, that's what I kind of did. I took the pop tune as the repertoire, but then I brought it into. I was kind of thinking, okay, if I was in the 50s and 60s, what would I do with this melodic tune, right?
And
so
you can try that now with the Rihanna tune.
Well, the other thing I'm doing with pop tunes now is I'm realizing that probably the best thing, at least for me, in the tune are the vocal performances, and like trying to really get into the phrasing and all the nuances that the vocalists do is what's really special about those tunes. One tune that caught my ear that way was Rihanna's "Love on the Brain." So this is just a little bit of what I've been doing with that.
All right. That's Rihanna's Love on the Brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, man.
And you got I can hear your sound is amalgamation of all like different kinds of genres. You hear it's not just a straight jazz sound. I hear the fusion. I hear the pop influence in there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up listening to jazz, I grew up actually listening to the radio in the 60s and 70s, and again, it was a fantastic time. And I also grew up in a very multicultural area. I grew up in what's called Little Italy, but really, I grew up very close to College Street, and certainly College Street was very Italian. And actually, like some of those Southern Italian, especially tunes, where there was a real mix of Middle Eastern influences there too, are part of my background as well, my musical background. But, you venture off just north of that, like Bloor Street, and very, very multicultural area.
Right.
I remember actually having a paper route one summer, and there were these low-rise apartment buildings, like just around Honest Eds, and I remember delivering there, and all the different smells of the foods. They weren't cooking, spaghetti and meatballs, for sure. And so a lot of Caribbean influences and things like that. I certainly remember listening to Bill Withers a lot on the radio, and that having like a real appeal for me. And the band War was like Cisco Kid in particular. That tune, that kind of a real dirty kind of groove, like really appealed to me.
Right. So it's all found its way into your playing.
I think so. I think that's just inevitable,
Right. So let's go back to talking about Liberty Silver. So why didn't that band end up touring with Billy Ocean?
Well, I can't really say. It wouldn't be right for me to actually say, and I don't really know, the absolute reason. But there was a lot of rumors about, some of the performers, and not me.
But it didn't come together.
I was clean as a whistle.
Oh.
But there was problems. Liberty did have a BMG recording contract, and we did a bunch of videos that summer, I remember. I was searching for them on YouTube the other day, and some of them have been changed, so... And she had, some minor hits, I think, but I don't know if it really took off. For me, it was like that summer I really had a taste of what it could be like to be like a real professional musician. And then when that thing went south...
Was that the final straw for you?
Well, that's a... I don't know if I've ever had the final straw, because I've always really... wanted to do it.
And you're still doing it now.
And I'm still doing it, but this is after 27 years of teaching,
Right.
And certainly, see, the other thing that happened too, as I was playing more and more, I was interacting with more and more musicians. And again, back then I was usually the youngest one in the band, right? Especially when I did jobbing bands. And you talk to these older musicians who were always complaining that there was less and less work, and that, certainly looking into the future, it wasn't going to get better, right? And so that played on my mind, and I thought, do I really want to struggle doing this, or do I want to have a career where I have a nice car and maybe buy a house and be able to support a family? And so that's why I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe I should do teaching. And back then, I also thought that I could do teaching and still pursue this, because I really didn't know what teaching was all about. For me, I've always loved school, and I've always loved music class, and I always had a great time in music class, and it seemed like everyone was having a good time in music class. So I thought maybe as a teacher, I could also have a good time in music class and go home, and I'd still have all this energy to, work on my craft and then gig, right?
But you said it was a struggle first couple of years.
Yeah. It was so hard. It was just, well, it's one thing to be on the other side of the desk, and when you're at the front of the class and you have all this responsibility, it's a big load to carry, and it certainly was for me. And I'm a person who cares about what I do, and it was important for me that, if kids were struggling in the class, that I'd be there to help them, and I try to make it a positive situation for everyone. Whereas I know other teachers who wouldn't really, let that bother them too much. But that always weighed heavy on me because I wanted to do a good job no matter what I did, right?
What were those first years like as a teacher?
They were very hard. I actually started with a Catholic board, and I worked as what they call an itinerant music teacher. And an itinerant is someone who goes from school to school, with their bag of tricks, and they do music. It was mainly for grade 5, 6, 7, and 8. Yeah.
Right. And then how did you get the Earl Haig jazz studies?
Well, that was after 10 years, right? So I did the middle school thing for about 2 years and realized that, I kind of liked working with those kids, but the problem was because I was floating around from school to school, I never really had enough time with them. So, how many times can you talk about a whole note being with 4 beats, right? Yeah, the progress was just such a slow pace that I couldn't do it. I was just too bored, right?
It wasn't rewarding.
Well, it didn't, certainly when we did concerts and the kids made sounds and they were proud, it was something, but because I was learning myself at the time, right? And I was excited about learning music, right? Because I had just started learning music like just a few years ago, right? Just a few years before that.
Right.
I needed to feed that, right? And so I thought, I can't do this middle school. I have to do a high school, at least, more challenging music. I get to work with kids more. So it was weird because when I first got into teaching, they were screaming for teachers. When I was at Teachers College in Windsor, the boards actually came out to all the schools and they would get you to sign I had a signed teacher's contract the second week of January.
Wow.
Like halfway through my year as in Teachers College.
Because they really needed the teachers.
They needed teachers in a big way. And they wanted to get you as soon as they could. It's so different now, and it has been so different for maybe 10 years now, unfortunately.
But I imagine it was really competitive when you were trying to get the jazz studies position.
Well, very much. Music positions at an art school are very much coveted. And so although it's different in that you have to kind of know people internally, right? I was recommended then by the person in charge of music, what was their position? I forget what anyway, people who work with the board, right, who kind of know all the music teachers, I was recommended. And so they had me meet with some of the teachers there, and luckily it went well. I think they liked the fact that I was young at the time, and so I had all this energy.
Still young now.
And, I don't know about that. And so, I got... It was really lucky for me because there was other people interested, probably people who had certainly more experience for sure.
Was it enjoyable when you first started teaching at Haig?
Oh, it was very enjoyable. I thought when I first got there, I thought, oh, yes, finally I got to the school because my first 10 years, well, I shouldn't say all of it, but I struggled a lot. I wasn't really at a place where I felt comfortable. I did some like 5 different positions in 10 years, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, being bounced around, some of it was my own doing. Some of it was because of cutbacks, so they bump you off to other schools, right? And most of them were in struggling music programs. I was at Georges Henry 3 years before I went to Earl Haig, and that was actually good. It was a big band program, but the only jazz we could do was after school, right? So it was... the idea that I could actually teach jazz in a classroom.
What does that mean to you?
It was so big. And again, because it was something that I was excited about. I was excited about learning myself. And so for me to convey that knowledge that I was learning and to convey it to people who were keenly interested in jazz, young musicians, it was great. It was magical.
What was the most rewarding part of it?
It always comes down... Well, I shouldn't say always, but the performances were always pretty special. The jazz nights we did, especially when we did them at the Lula Lounge, we started off doing it in the cafeteria, right? And then we graduated, we took it off-site, and it was really good. The kids, you could tell they were enthused. They were in a real nightclub, and they would work hard, and they would, and it would come together, and it was, for me, it was fun just to like get them to that stage and to present in front of their parents and their peers, and, just to have fun with it,
Were
It's
you ever
pretty cool.
concerned about teaching a profession that was so hard to make it? It was so hard to make it in.
Well, that really didn't happen for me till later. And in my early career, whenever I saw a student who was dedicated and who had a lot of promise, I always pushed them. I would say, you should really check out music and jazz, post-secondary, and see what might come of it, right? And just as I got to the end of my career, I started to stop doing that.
Why?
Well, just because I saw that, it was, not only was it hard and, way back then, it was getting to be almost impossible. I don't know the real statistics, but I don't think there are too many jazz labels anymore, period, and I don't know if they give out too many contracts, so the jazz thing has gotten so small, and, it's so competitive too, right? I mean, and not only that, I always wondered, like, here we are in Toronto, and Toronto's got some fabulous jazz musicians. And I always wondered, I said, well, how come they all have teaching jobs?
I
Right?
thought about that too.
Yeah, that tells you a lot, right? And, they're playing great. I remember, like, back then, it was more than just the Rex. There was Montreal Bistro, Top of the Senator was a big one. And you go out and see these, Toronto cats playing, and man, they sounded so great, And yet, they were making, I don't know how much they make, maybe a couple $100 at the end of the night. That's not enough, right? To live in Toronto? Are you kidding me? You're not going to make a living that way. So yeah, all of them have, gigs either at Humber or at U of T or at York, right?
Right. So it just becomes this vicious cycle where if you can't get the work, then you have to go and teach. And they teach the kids and they come out and then they can't find any work and then they go teach.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What made you want to retire? Were you thinking about it for a couple of years before you actually did it? Or was it immediate?
I've been thinking about it ever since I started teaching. And that's not to take anything away from teaching. It's just that music has always pulled me. Always. And, one of the reasons why the first few years of teaching were so hard for me is because I would come home exhausted just because of all the responsibility. And again, part of that was didn't expect that, right? I was expecting it to be easier than it was. And so I come home exhausted, and I still want to pick up my horn and play and learn something, right? Or do something creative. And I just didn't have the energy for it, right? And then, you talk about a vicious cycle. Then, for me, saxophone doesn't come easy for me. It's something I love to do. But if I'm not playing all the time, my chops go south. And then it's like this uphill battle, right? So, I wasn't spending enough time at it. And yet when I picked it up, I wanted to sound at least as good as I did last time. And it just wasn't happening, right? So it was very frustrating. Yeah, very frustrating. It was a hard time.
Have you had more time to focus on the saxophone now that you've retired?
Absolutely, yeah. Last year when I started my my graduate degree, school got in the way because there were papers to read and papers to write, that sort of thing. And this year I've actually taken a leave, and so I've had more time to play. And this year has actually been a really good year. And sometimes I think about that, how I've sabotaged myself because...
In what ways?
Well, check it out, right? I end up retiring, and the first thing I do is I jump into something else other than playing, right? So there's part of me that is kind of afraid, and it probably has a lot to do with my upbringing. My parents saying, "No, you don't want to go into music," right?
Yeah.
And that's still, I guess, I carry that burden, right? So
you have to pay the bills now, and it's really hard to just freelance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, reality comes into play for sure. But, there's something, if you don't answer something that's calling you, that's something that's pulling at your heart, other things are going to go wrong. And like I tried, actually. I think it was my second year of teaching where I was frustrated at work. I'd come home, I'd pick up my horn and try to play. I'd be frustrated there. So I just said, you know what? I'm just going to put the horn away. I'm just going to concentrate on teaching, right? That's it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Like I got so depressed. I needed it in my life, right? So I had to find a way to kind of have it at least in my life a little bit. So what I ended up doing was just lowering my standard and just saying, okay, I just got to do this for now. And then, when I first got married, my wife moved in with me. And all of a sudden we have, 2 incomes. So I decided then, I said, okay, I'm going to go half time, right? And that's what I did. That was about 10 years ago. And that also helped because then, every other day I wouldn't be at school. And so I'd be playing, right?
Do you think about what your life would be like if you didn't teach?
Yeah, I've thought about that often. Of course,
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to go down that path, right?
Did you make the right choice?
I really don't know. I don't regret teaching at all. I mean, some of the students I've worked with have just been beautiful people and great musicians, yourself included,
Thanks.
And I really regret that I wasn't really, working with you on jazz that much, right? Because by that point I had kind of gotten out of it. Yeah, I mean, I've had some wonderful times teaching, the students have been great and some of my colleagues have been fabulous, and certainly, it got to the point where, I bought a house and, I'm comfortable, I could say financially, and I've got a pension,
But which part of your life do you look back at with the most pride?
Without doubt, my kids. Yeah, without doubt, that was the best decision I ever made. Yeah.
Having them?
Yeah, having kids is really special for me.
Has it changed? What has it changed in your life?
I have a good friend of mine who's a vocalist, Carmelina Vinjaguerra, and she would always say, you don't know what love is until you have kids. And it's so true. I mean, we have romantic love and love for your friends or something you love to do or something you have. But until you have kids, your own kids, and you would do anything for them, and, you just want them to be okay, and it's a whole different world,
Would you want your kids to do music?
You know what? I think I'm at the point where, parenting has that challenge, right? What do you do? Like, as a parent, you certainly want to protect them, but you really can't do that, right? If my kids show real interest in music, I'm going to support them, and I'm going to hopefully point them in the right direction in terms of getting good teachers so that they can hone their craft and, help them out with challenges come their way, performance challenges, whatever kind of, industry challenges, whatever. But having said that, I would do that with anything they're interested in. If my little girl is interested in dance, I do the same thing. My little girl is actually very interested in playing hockey.
All right.
And so, if she really takes a keen interest in that, then I'm going to support it, I think you have to do that. I think as a parent, that is your role.
To support them in whatever they want to do.
Yeah. I think you have to. Because, there's certainly financial hardships in the arts, absolutely, right? It's a tough go. But there are other hardships if you choose another career where really your heart isn't into it, And I think that's why we have so many people who are on medication, right? Personally, because they're doing their jobs and they're making their money, but they really don't want to be there.
Right.
Right.
But you made you followed your heart.
Well, in some way, I tried to marry the two.
You found the balance.
Yeah.
Right. Anyways, there's so much more I want to ask you, but we gotta wrap up.
Okay.
Thanks so much for being here.
Sure, my pleasure, man.
Double Booked. Great to see you too. Double Booked airs every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. And every week I interview a musician about the music that they listen to and the music that they make. Previous episodes of Double Booked are all available on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Felix Wong Music. I'm your host, Felix Wong, here in the studio tonight with John Pagnotta, and thanks for tuning in to Double Booked on CJRE 1280 AM. Here's one more from his album New Standards, It's called I Can't Feel My Face. Have a wonderful Thursday evening.